Great, and we will get started. So hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Garelick. I use she, her pronouns, and I am JUFJ's DC community organizer. I'm so glad to have you with us here tonight for this one-to-one training. So in the chat, if seen people already introduced yourselves, but if you haven't already, please introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, where you're from, and we hope that everyone will also answer this question in the chat. We're going to pose two, and feel free to answer one or the other or both of them. One of the questions is, what feelings come up when you think about a one-to-one? And what do you want to learn about to deepen your understanding of one-to-ones today? So we'll give some time. The question is in the chat to answer that question. So we have a question we want to answer, like why one-to-ones are so important for organizing. That's a great question, Michelle. And so as people are putting their questions and their introductions in the chat, I also just want to give a quick Zoom reminder that we've enabled closed captioning for this event. So if you would like to disable it, you can find the CC button on Zoom's bottom menu and click Disable Live Transcript. And we're really glad that you're all here. And if you have any tech questions, you can message tech support, which is Devora. Maybe Devora, you could give a quick wave, who can answer any of your questions. Great. So I'm also just seeing, like, reflecting back a little bit what people are saying here. Like to learn about how to follow up afterwards and keep building the connection, wanting to feel prepared, but maybe a little anxious. One-to-ones can be a little scary. That's super real. I'm seeing more answers of, like, had really good experiences with one-to-ones, found them to be structured and helpful and with lots of opportunities and able to speak and learn with others. Want to learn how to, like, engage better, how to build and establish personal relationships and connections. But it's also kind of stressful to think about how to have this in an authentic way and not a transactional conversation. These are all incredible points. Meeting new people. It's also scary to make asks of people. I'm loving all of these things in the comments, in the chat here. These are all things we're going to dive into, and there's going to be a lot that maybe we'll still have remaining questions, and that's amazing as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel and to get us started.
Thank you, Hannah. Let me just get our presentation up here. All right, can everyone see? Oh, well, that's not the right thing. Can everyone see the presentation?
It looks like we're seeing the pre-present mode of the slides.
Let me try that one more time. Thanks. All right, and there we go. Okay. All right, everyone can see our first screen here? Awesome. I was telling my colleagues that I'm personally working on getting better at tech support. So, please bear with me as I hone in on my tech skills today. So why are we here? So first off, my name is Rachel, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Baltimore City community organizer. Why do this training now? So 2 weeks ago, we did a base building training. I hope some of you were there. If you weren't at that training, that's also fine too. We're glad you're here today. We started off that training really honing in on the importance of why we build a base and how it all comes down to power. We were naming some organizations that we think about that are powerful in our networks, organizations like CASA or APSME or SEIU, organizations with bases and JUFJ. In order to make change around the social, economic, and racial justice issues that matter to us, we know that we need power. And we are powerful when we come together, when we show our people power, and we show our strength. As the old organizing phrase goes, power is either organized people or organized money. And we, JUFJ and our allies, we are never going to out-money the moneyed. We gain our power from our people. So we're always going to be out-moneyed, so we need to organize people. And the way we organize people is through one-to-ones. One-to-ones are the way we build power, we build relationships, and we build our base. So they're kind of like the key tool that we use for this work. Previously, staff handled one-to-ones, but that really meant that mostly only staff owned the relationships and the responsibility for growing our working groups and growing our base. And our hope today and in the future is to continue to develop organizational leadership so that all GFGers have the opportunity to develop those relationships and their organizing skills. We want all leaders to be comfortable doing one-to-ones and feel ownership of growing the base, growing our working groups, and growing the work. So, wait a second, we did that. Okay, so our goals for today. Our goal is to understand what a one-to-one is and why it's a useful and meaningful organizing tool. Learn how to tell your JFG story and elicit it from someone else, and become comfortable and confident with doing one-to-ones with new folks. So we hope you all leave here today with these skills. This is the agenda. I know it looks like a lot, but we worked really hard to make the agenda like fun and have different components. So I hope you all enjoy yourselves. We're going to go over what a one-to-one is and isn't, the steps of a one-to-one and what kind of questions to ask. We'll do a storytelling exercise. Then we're all going to get to watch Devora in a sample demonstration. Then we're going to practice one-to-one ourselves. And then in 2 hours, you're going to be ready to do one-to-ones. So that is our agenda for today. And now I am going to pass it to Eliana, who's going to take us to the next part.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Eliana. I use the She series, and I'm a Maryland organizer with JUFJ. And before I dive into content, I would love to do a quick show of hands. If you're on video, you can raise your hand. If you're not, no worries, you can use a Zoom hand. Who has been in a one-to-one training before? Yeah, I'm seeing quite a few hands go up. And then regardless of whether or not you've been to a training or not, who has done a one-to-one before? Great, I'm seeing lots and lots of hands, which is really wonderful. So if you feel like you have insights or knowledge to share throughout this training, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're really excited to be here tonight and to share this wealth of knowledge together. And every time I take or I lead a one-to-one training, I learn something new or understand something differently than I have before. So hopefully all of us can leave tonight with a few new insights, no matter what we've learned before today. So I'm going to share a scenario. This might be a situation that's familiar to you. And if you haven't been in this exact scenario, I'm sure you've been in one similar. So let's say your synagogue is holding an event that you helped to plan, and you really, really want your fellow congregants to attend. There's a world, right, where you could post about it on Facebook and email your synagogue listserv and put up a flyer. And when you're out and about running errands and getting groceries, you bump into folks you know, and you could tell them, hey, this event is happening and you should come. And then you just go about the rest of your day. And there's a chance that if you do all of that and you ask enough people, you might find a solid handful of people to attend your event. But when we're looking for building a community for activism, that kind of outreach isn't sufficient. It doesn't get us all the way to where we want to be. And I'm going to turn this question of why to you. So folks can feel free to put in the chat or unmute with in that scenario, thinking about organizing for activism, why having that sort of I'm going to post on Facebook, I'm going to email, I'm going to bump into people and just tell them that this thing is happening, why that isn't sufficient. Yeah, and I'm seeing from Luis that bumping into people doesn't get you commitment. People will think it sounds great, but then are busy and might think, oh, someone else is going to do it. A lack of follow-up. You might only really reach people that are already there with you, the folks that are the most engaged. I'm seeing lots of really great thoughts in the chat. There might not be accountability, or like the bumping into each other might be too casual. Yeah, all of that is exactly right on. When we think of this, we think of two main reasons. Just as folks said in the chat, it doesn't build strong commitments. There's no accountability between you and the amorphous group of people on your listserv, or there isn't real accountability between you and the person you talk to for like a minute and a half in the safe way. And the other reason is that it doesn't teach you anything about what motivates the people that you're working with, right? You have no idea why they might be interested in your event, or if they're even interested at all. So this brings us to like a real need to have one-to-ones. And you have one-to-ones with everybody, with anyone who seems remotely interesting, who shows up at your meetings or indicates an interest, in our case, in JUFJ, and even some of the folks that maybe don't seem the most interesting. And if one-to-ones aren't happening and aren't happening with everybody, you're missing out on an opportunity to retain, sustain, or build your membership. And by having one-to-ones, you can know who to ask for which roles, because you're building a good set of data. And you really just need to have relationships so you can have specific conversations with folks to be able to know them and what's motivating them to act. So I'm going to share a definition of a one-to-one. And an important caveat throughout this training is that a one-to-one is not a static thing. You might have a one-to-one that will diverge from this definition. So I think Rachel will now share the definition of the one-to-one on a slide. And if we could have a brave volunteer unmute and read that definition, that would be wonderful.
I'll read it. What is a one-to-one? A one-to-one is an intentional two-person conversation to build a public relationship for action.
Great, thanks so much, Cap. So we're just going to spend a couple minutes now unpacking what every part of this definition means. And folks can feel free to unmute and engage verbally, or also feel free to engage in the chat. So if we're looking at that first bolded word, intentional, can folks either say or put in the chat a little bit more of what it would mean for a conversation to be intentional?
It's planned.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm seeing on the thread of it being planned, you're setting time aside, you're giving it your real attention. It's purposeful, there are goals. Everyone understands the purpose of the conversation. Yeah, exactly right. So when we think about a one-to-one being intentional, as folks said on the chat, you're carving out time to have this conversation. And you've already thought about what you're going to say and what you're going to ask going in. And you've thought about what you want to get out of the conversation, both beforehand, during, and after, right? Like really key to a one-to-one is that people are intentional. You're not having a random conversation with somebody you just happen to pass in the street. And an important note here too is in COVID land, we are doing these over Zoom right now. And we want to be especially mindful of like the different capacities on time and like screen time that having one-to-ones over Zoom requires. So always, but especially with some of the particularities of Zoom, we want to be meaningful and respectful and considerate of people's time and be bringing that intentionality to different mediums while it's not possible to have one-to-ones in person the way that we might like. Okay, so moving on to our second bolded one. A one-to-one is a two-person conversation. And just to say really explicitly, it's possible to have really, really meaningful, robust conversations in a group, and those are wonderful and important. They are not a one-to-one. A one-to-one really specifically is a conversation with you and one other person. And there are like many, many different reasons for this. Do folks, again, unmute or in the chat want to just throw out a couple of reasons why you would want a one-to-one to be just you and one other person? Yeah, that's exactly right, Casey. You don't want to split attention. Not everyone will speak as freely. It can be difficult to build relationships, and it's hard to build that same accountability when the conversation is diffused. Another really important reason is that a key part of doing a one-to-one is to understand what's motivating somebody to act. And when you're in a group or it's like two people that you're talking to, it can be really difficult to untangle who is holding this feeling, who is the person that really feels this, etc. Great. So a public relationship. So a public relationship is one that is based around shared interest, values, and purpose. So it's a relationship that's about a shared commitment to the work you're doing together and about accountability to each other around doing this work. And we don't want to focus too much on the term public. I'm defining it in this way to emphasize some dimensions of relationships, right? So having a conversation with Hannah as a friend about doing the work, you know, where I'm just telling her about my day and chatting about what's happening at JUFJ in the Maryland session is really, really different than me having a one-to-one with Hannah, where we're working to build a public relationship and be accountable to each other. Great. So I think I am going to put a pin in action. We'll come back to that, and I'm going to pass it to Devora.
Thanks, Eliana. Hi, folks. My name is Devora Stavisky. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a community organizer with Montgomery County here at JUFJ. And we're going to spend the next few moments pausing on that definition and coming back to a term that Eliana named, that is self-interest. So I'm going to invite folks, if in the chat, if you want to write, what is self-interest? And I'm also pasting that in the chat for folks as well. Feel free to write in the chat what you think that means, and we'll take a few moments to unpack that together. Great, seeing a lot of good content here, seeing self-interest can be something that I or you personally will benefit from, personal values and motivations, what folks feels brings them to get involved, interests, something that will make me or you better off, not someone else. And I'm seeing from Louise, I think the definition that we'll jump off from for tonight, which is why would someone be interested in getting involved? What inspires their action, or what they see as a problem? So really self-interest is ultimately what is going to get the person that we're talking to identify what they uniquely care about and are motivated by, and seeing a lot of other similar definitions in the chat. So excellent work, folks. Y'all got it. So I know oftentimes we talk about self-interest as a kind of selfish thing, right? It like is something that feels kind of hard to identify, but I want to take a moment to name that self-interest is really a positive quality, right? When we organize, we're identifying that each of us on this call, in the work, has a self-interest, something that is motivating us to act, that is moving us from our values to action. And that's what we're trying to find. So as you can see on the slide, self-interest can be someone's unique dreams, desires, or challenges. And as the slide shows, it's not just the experiences someone has had, not just the stories that they might tell about something or the facts they might share, but how they feel about something that they've gone through, and then also what the narrative is that is leading them to think why, right, they feel a certain way. So to follow up on this, what I really want to underscore is the thing that's super important here is that when we do a one-on-one, our plan is not necessarily to force someone to do something. We're sort of like an agitator, right? What we're doing is we're helping other people identify their self-interest in these intimate conversations, and then using that identification of self-interest, whether it be values or a narrative or an experience, to really connect them from the thing that they think to eventually taking action to really live out that self-interest. And so what that means is really showing why, personally, we might feel agitated to do the work so that we can sort of model what self-interest looks like for the other person. And then ultimately allow them to connect their experience to the actions, right, that we're taking as a movement, as JUFJ. So we have the definition of self-interest. We've talked a little bit about the definition of a one-to-one, and we've really delved into each part of that definition. So we're gonna move on now to talking about what a one-to-one is and it isn't, but I wanna just pause for a moment and give folks a few seconds to write any questions in the chat about the definition or self-interest before we continue to what a one-to-one is. Great. So pending no questions. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you, Michaela. I see your question. How do we handle this when we may not know everything about the topics discussed? And I am a little confused about understanding how someone might feel about an action. Great question. This feels like a really excellent question for the section where we start talking about doors and stories and openings and how we might be able to follow up on questions people ask about our campaign work. And we'll get to that a little later. So let's hold that question for now. I think we might come back to it, or we certainly will come back to it a little later in our training. The last piece I'm going to share before we go to the next slide is that last part of the definition where we talk about action really ties into the self-interest piece right here, because we're naming that the purpose of our conversation is to go from identifying that self-interest to having folks take action. And excellent questions that we're seeing in the chat. So let's go to the next slide and let's talk about what a one-to-one is and isn't. So for this section, I'd love to have 2 volunteers, one person to read the left column in full, and then a second person to read the right column in full. So can we get one person who hasn't yet volunteered to please read what a one-to-one is? Feel free to write your name in the chat if you'd like.
I can do what it is, what a one-to-one is.
Great. So Sarah, if you want to take what a one-to-one is, Melissa, I see you wrote your name in the chat. You can follow with what a one-to-one is not. Go ahead.
Okay, a one-to-one is an exchange of stories. Oh, I go down the list, or?
Yeah, it would be great if you can go all the way down the list. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, sorry. I thought we were doing one and then one. An exchange of stories, public or about work, rooted in self-interest, conversation, curiosity, vulnerability, a scheduled conversation.
One-to-one is not a list of tasks that you want someone to take off your plate, private or about friendship, convincing, selling, an interview or one-way, prying, spontaneous catch-up.
And take a few moments to keep reading that as you like and process it in the chat, or excuse me, and just process it on your own. And in a few moments, I will paste a prompt for us in the chat, but take a few moments to keep reading that on your own. Great. So Eliana's going to paste our prompt for us in the chat, but our question for reflection is, why do you think one-to-ones are an effective tool for organizing based on this list of what we see one-to-ones as being and as not being? Great. I'm seeing from Carrie that they're effective because people are aware of what the one-to-one is about. It's very intentional. There's a certain mindset. Melissa's sharing they tap into someone's authentic motivation. Dan is sharing, oh my gosh, so much coming in. Dan is sharing that they really get people to think more deeply about the issue at hand. Seeing from Louise that they elicit involvement and excitement. From Rachel that you can really find opportunities targeted to someone by understanding their interests. Seeing from Cap, building an understanding of each other and motivations to work together. I really love that. From Nora, genuine exchange. From Casey, helps people realize why they are motivated. Yes, that's exactly right. From Shayna, sharing stories. Seeing from Michaela that this might be a little bit of a different organizing approach. Thank you for sharing that, Michaela. Let's keep talking about that. From Rhonda, that it helps folks be comfortable discussing what we're asking of them. And from Julia, that this really helps people make a decision without feeling asked or forced, right? Because they're coming to it on their own. Excellent reflections. So essentially, we could stop here, right? And y'all would clearly, from your responses in the chat, know what a one-to-one is and likely be able to do one. But, you know, it's always helpful to get a little more help to see what a one-to-one actually looks like. So we're going to give you a little bit of a formula. I'm going to pass it to Hannah to talk to us about what the steps of a one-to-one are.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And it's so great to see everything coming in the chat. So one-to-ones aren't necessarily a strict formula. We're going to provide some steps and ways that you can think about how to structure a one-to-one. But like we said at the very beginning, one-to-ones are not static things. They're these natural conversations that you're having with folks. So one of the main points of them is having these flexible conversations with people in order to build these connections and relationships. So we're going to share some of these steps to help kind of structure and move forward with doing a one-to-one. And a couple different, and we're going to continue to provide a few different frameworks for approaching a one-to-one. All of these are meant to be helpful in helping you think through what a one-to-one could look like. And they're also just guideposts and not this strict formula, because there is no perfect one-to-one. I'm sure anyone could tell you there is no perfect one-to-one. So we're going to share in the chat a document. The first part of that document has that chart that we just looked at. So we're going to look below it. And we're going to take some time to read it. And we're also going to put it up on the screen share. So that document should be linked in the chat now. So you can look at it, and maybe, Rachel, we could zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And we're just going to take 1 to 2 minutes to skim over this. We're going to dig into it. So no need to read every single line. So as you may be skimming through, I'm just going to name out loud the couple of sections of a one-to-one in this structure. So the first few minutes are chit chat, and then you remind them like who you are and the purpose and the goals of this meeting. So I'd say, hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a JFJ community organizer. You say maybe you're involved in the campaign fund or whatever it is. And then you get to know them, ask questions and looking at the stories. And this is like the core of the one-to-one. Then you may share some of your own story and your own experiences. And then there's the business section where there's maybe an ask or a thing that you're asking them to do or be a part of, an invitation on their proposal of something that they're interested in. And then you close out the conversation. If you were in person, there's maybe the awkward, are we going the same way? And you just said bye and you're walking down the street together, or on Zoom, you just say goodbye. So in the chat, if people could respond just a little bit about what you noticed. What did you notice in this structure of a one-to-one? So good question, Sarah. Sarah asked in the chat, it looks like it starts after the one-to-one is already arranged. So we're gonna share a little bit of language at the end that we'll share all the slides with you, of course, about how to set up the one-to-one. But if folks could respond in the chat, what are you noticing about this structure? There's a lot of ground to cover in one meeting. Yeah, this is a really full agenda. It prioritizes gathering information about someone's self-interest and their identity. It's asking a lot of questions. It sounds similar to fundraising. There's connection between individuals. That's great. Julia, yeah, and Casey, you wanna give people the space to actualize what they really want. And the way to do that is by having them tell their stories. The drawing out story section is challenging for Nora. That might be a hard piece there. A lot of the questions that are personal and not all about JFJ or campaign work. That you're sharing the structure with the other person, that you want them to know, like you're clear and you're giving consent to the kind of conversation that you're having, and that there's a lot of open-ended questions. These are all super, super right on and great observations about the structure. What I think a lot of you picked up on and noticed is that one of the biggest parts of this one-to-one structure is that it's about the conversation on telling stories and building relationship. A lot of people are going to want to get to know exactly what JFJ is doing and what the next steps are and what's going on. And we want to kind of pull back and frame the conversation that you want to get to know them first, and you want them to get to know you before you really get to like all the business and the details of the work that you're doing. And if you're a little bit worried about like, do I have the thing about what is JFJ doing? Do I know that thing? We always suggest you can always check in with organizers, with the JFJ staff to, make sure you have the most up-to-date ask or the thing that's going on. But also just knowing that if someone's interested in housing, that we have a housing working group in DC. And that's also all you really need to know. And then you can do the follow-up with staff organizers to make sure they get added to the Google group and they get to the next meeting. So another way of thinking about the steps of a one-to-one and how they all fit together is thinking about how the questions you are asking are achieving the goals of the conversation. So we're going to show a little stick figure visual to think about the different parts of a person that may get them to action. So here we have our little stick figure. So we have at first the head, and the head is the analysis, the thinking person. This is probably the views, the articles that they read, the content of the bill or the legislation that you're talking about. And then there's the heart, this feeling about how activism, or maybe it's their Jewish social justice values, makes them feel. And it might also be their fears that they have holding them back from taking action. And it might also be their anger, that they're really upset about something. And then there's the feet, the core motivations or that self-interest that we were just talking about. This is like the why of their personal story. This is the thing that's going to move them and take them to action. And then the hands are the doing, the like you signed a petition or you sent an action alert or you called your council member. And it's really easy, I think a lot of the times, to really focus on the head and the hands, like the thinking analysis brain and the like actively doing writing brain. And we forget that we also need the heart and we really need the feet and all of these things put together and the feelings and the stories about how you get there. So here, this is just like a little thing to remind yourself of all the parts of a person that's bringing them to action. So where we are now is that we want to think about our own stories and our own experiences so that we can start building our network, our vision of how we have a one-to-one. So we already answered this a little bit of like why we're telling stories in one-to-ones. Is anything sitting with folks about why a story might be really important in a one-to-one? And folks can feel free to unmute or put in the chat why we tell stories in a one-to-one. Carries the emotional connection, absolutely. They stick in your head more than facts and statistics, totally. Learning how to tell your story is really important. And that, like that elevator pitch of who you are or what you're doing or why you're doing it. These are all so true. This is totally, yeah, totally right on. People relate to stories, that they're personal. Absolutely. Stories really bring out a stronger relationship building, like connector. It also shows vulnerability and that you're building trust with someone and you're getting to know each other on a deeper level beyond small talk. And then when you share your story, you're opening up the like space where someone is going to be more willing and open to share with you. This is all like totally, totally great. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time processing and thinking about our own stories. So we're going to give some time. If you are a journaler, this is your time to journal. If you're like me, I think in bullet points on a notes app on my phone, if that is your style, amazing. So we're going to play some music and we're going to think about our stories a little bit. No one is expected to have a perfect story. And we want you to start thinking about the stories that you could be telling in a one-to-one. So we have some prompts we're going to put into the chat. One is what moves you to take action. So thinking about specific moments in your life that have been transformative or inspiring for you. These could be moments that you have felt angered or frustrated, or moments really inspired and heartened. And we're not going to share them back immediately, but we're going to come back to them in a little bit. So feel free at this point, you can either turn off your cameras for a little bit, or, you know, do whatever journaling or whatever processing to think about your own story and your own experience of what moves you to action. This question is in the chat now, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Great, so we're gonna start the recording again just for a few minutes. So I hope you all were thinking about the stories that you were maybe telling, and I thought that I would share just really quickly one of the stories that I tell a lot in one-to-one. So for DC folks, apologies if you've already heard this one. But I normally share a story in one-to-ones about an experience I had in high school. I grew up really involved in various Jewish communities, and I was really involved in BBYO, a Jewish youth group, in Maryland, in Montgomery County. I'm a Silver Spring kid. And there was a moment when I was the president of my chapter in BBYO, that there was an opportunity to take some action around, like, generally like sexual assault and violence. And it was a program that they were running around for high schoolers, specifically Jewish high schoolers in BBYO. And being the like DC council area, the greater DC area, there was an opportunity to lobby Congress around this issue. However, the opportunity was only given to the boys chapters because BBYO functions in a sorority, fraternity, very normative structure. And the girls chapters were encouraged to buy purple nail polish and sit at home and talk about it. And 16-year-old Hannah was angry. I was really angry. And I said no. I had this, like, I was powerful. I had a gavel. I was the president of my chapter. And I was like, no. And I made a choice in that moment. And I told grown-ups, they were probably 20-something-year-old grown-ups, that I wasn't gonna participate If people wanted to on their own time, they were welcome to, but it was not something that I felt comfortable with because it wasn't my values and it wasn't something that I cared. It wasn't the way that I wanted to be represented. And I was really disappointed because I really cared about my community. I really, really cared about my Jewish community and the people I was with in my chapter. And I knew that we could be better, and we were better than that. And I knew that our Jewish community could be better than that. And so my friends and I were really we were trying to organize. I only have this language now. We were trying to organize. We were trying to make the Jewish community that we wanted to live in and we wanted to be a part of, but wasn't representing ourselves right now. So that's a story that I tell. And I go into more details depending on the moment, depending on the person. I kind of alter certain aspects of it, not faking it, but I kind of go further into certain details about it as it's relevant to the person that I'm talking to. And I think it shows a story where there's a clear, I was angry, there was emotion, there was choice, and then I took action. And it shows kind of an arc of an experience that also really is clearly very impactful to who I am as a person today. My experiences in that Jewish space were both really, really powerful for who I am today. I learned so much and I grew so much, and are also places where I have a lot of this is why I do Jewish organizing. This is why I'm trying to make a different Jewish community. And so that's one of the stories that I bring in and I share. So I'm going to leave you all on this cliffhanger a little bit, and we're going to take a little bit of a screen break. So we're going to come back at 7:56. So if you need to get water, go to the bathroom, stretch, whatever it is. And also if you want to keep journaling, if maybe something is percolating, or if you want to keep thinking about your own story, feel free to do that. But we'll come back at 7:56.
Great, welcome back, folks. I'm seeing some cameras come back on. For our folks who are off camera, if you want to give us a thumbs up or a Zoom reaction so we know you're there, that would be wonderful. Great, I'm seeing some highs in the chat, some thumbs up. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to dive right back in. So something that I felt a lot of anxiety around as I was starting to do one-to-ones was I felt this pressure to have a perfect story, or to have the right story, or to have a really big moment in my life to be sharing in one-to-ones. And sometimes in trainings, as I was listening to really incredible stories, I would start feeling that pressure again and be oh, I don't think I have something to say that's like this story that I'm hearing. So something that I feel really strongly and we want to share with you tonight is there is no perfect story. There's no such thing as the right story to share, and you aren't expected to have a perfect story, and neither will the person that you're one-to-oneing. And the key is to help draw out a story by asking strategic questions. So you're sitting in a one-to-one and you have to get to the self-interest, and you want to get through, the steps we laid out on the handout. And it can feel scary, and it can feel like a lot of pressure. So we want to offer another tool to be helping with that. And as it says on our slide, a good conceptual framework I find is to be thinking about what are the doors. So doors are the opportunities to follow the conversation down a certain path. So as you're listening to somebody share a story, you want to be listening for doors. And this is ensuring that you get to the heart of the story that you're hearing, and also can maybe help protect you from really awkward silences. So let's say you're in a one-to-one and someone says, I just moved here from San Francisco and I really, really miss my Jewish community there. You might be listening for a door. right? What's the question that you can ask to be drawing out a story? What was that Jewish community like? What are you looking for here? What was something that you really remember cherishing back in San Francisco? So we are going to shift gears a little bit right now, and you're going to watch Devorah and Casey demonstrate a mini one-to-one. So during this fishbowl, during this demonstration of a one-to-one, we encourage you to keep an eye out and to write down or note in your phone or take a mental note of the doors that you recognize. And again, those are the opportunities to follow the conversation down a certain path. So we're going to stop the recording now,